And it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Bruce Shelton. And I believe all of us know Bruce, but I will share a couple things. Reminders. Bruce is senior pastor and serves on the pastoral council. He is currently president of the board of directors, as well as the head of the Building and Grounds Committee, and he is our music minister. He has been involved with many behind-the-scenes projects, and his example of giving of his time and energy is an inspiration to us all. In the greater community, Bruce works as a professional licensed counselor, having already retired from his job as a probation officer. And today, Bruce's talk title is the Bhagavad-Gita. So please help me welcome Bruce.
Well, good morning, everybody. If we could just have a few moments, I always like to ask you to help me with this talk. And if we could I'd ask you just to close your eyes and let's all tune into the presence of God. And let's just affirm that God will use me as His spokesperson today to share with you words that will be inspiring to you and uplifting. Thank you. Amen. Okay. When Mahatma Gandhi died at the hands of an assassin's bullet, a famous photograph was taken of all of his earthly belongings. He had 4 belongings. He had his simple white cloth clothing, his spectacles, his sandals, and he had a copy of the Bhagavad-Gita. That was everything. That's all he needed. Earlier in his life, at one point, he was quoted as saying, "My life has been full of external tragedies, and if they have not left any visible effect on me, I owe it to the teachings of the Bhagavad-Gita." The Bhagavad-Gita was Gandhi's spiritual compass throughout his life. It was what he based everything he did, was, according to him, was based upon this wonderful spiritual textbook. And so today we're going to take a look at this textbook and see the wisdom that's in the book. Some people have called the Bhagavad-Gita India's greatest spiritual gift to the world. It can be translated several ways, but the translation that most people like is it's translated to mean the Song of God, which is a beautiful description of this book. Nobody knows when it was written. Estimates range between 2,000 to 6,000 years ago, but the bottom line is nobody really knows. Nobody knows who wrote it, which is interesting. The author is unknown. It was written in the ancient Indian language of Sanskrit. I first was introduced to this book way back in about 1966. I was a student at ODU, and I was taking a course in comparative religions, one of the best courses I took in college. And this book, the Bhagavad-Gita, was given as part of was one of the readings that we were given to take a look at. And I was given the famous Penguin Classic translation by the Spaniard, who was very multilingual, and it was all in poetry. And I read it and tried to get into it, and I could tell it was a great book, but it was a type of thing I'd read a little bit and just kind of, I just couldn't get into it. And it sat on my bookshelf for years, and at one point during one of my moves, it disappeared, but I heard about it over the years. Ram Dass and others, I've been very interested in Hinduism, and I've heard about it over the years, but I never quite got into the book itself. Then about 2 years ago, I came across an audio-video recording by Eckhart Tolle. And if anybody can interpret the Bhagavad-Gita, it's someone like Eckhart Tolle. And he gave a wonderful, gave 2 1.5 hour talks on this book. And he opened my eyes to it, and he recommended a translation of the book by a man named Jack Harley. Jack Harley is an American, and he did a translation. It was called the Bhagavad-Gita, A Walk Through for Westerners. And I read this book, and for the very first time, the book became alive for me. It was very readable, and I started reading it, and now I've read, I guess, about 90% of it. And it's not the type of book you just read like a novel. It's a book which you read some verses, and it takes you right into spirit, you know. I can't believe this book was written so long ago, and it's so profound, and it's filled with spiritual truths. It's a part of a much larger book called the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is this story. It's a lot like the Game of Thrones. The Mahabharata is a story of these Indian families battling for power in India many years ago. And there was two families that were doing this, and one family represented the forces of light, the other the forces of darkness. And these families were battling, and then it all climaxed in this major battle, of which the Bhagavad-Gita is said to take. The Bhagavad-Gita is a dialogue between these two individuals, Arjuna, the great warrior prince, who was on the side of the family of light, the good guys, and then it was Krishna, who is this statue here is a statue of Krishna. And it was a dialogue between them, and it happened right before this huge battle, which was the climax of the Mahabharata. And so that's the context in which we find this book. Now, if this book, the Bhagavad Gita, had been written and not incorporated as one of the chapters in this Mahabharata, it probably would have been lost to history. But by being in the Mahabharata, which is this long epic poem, it's continued, and it's got. Eckhart Tolle says that the rest of the book is largely drama, but the Mahabharata. But he says the Bhagavad Gita is pure spiritual gold. I meant to bring it up here with me. I have something I have to read to you from it. Let me get it. Sorry. So I'd like to read to you a description of the beginning of this battle, and it kind of sets up the book. This description of the battle is found in Jack Harley's book, the Bhagavad Gita, A Walk Through for Westerners, in his preface. The year is 3141 BCE. Arjuna, an esteemed warrior prince at the height of his powers, the greatest man of action of his time, is readying to go into battle. It is a righteous fight to regain a kingdom rightfully his. All his life he has been a courageous, successful achiever, renowned for prowess in combat. But now, on the eve of the biggest clash of his career, an odd thing happens. His hands begin to shake. Arjuna is in his magnificent war chariot pulled by 4 white steeds. The chariot driver, Arjuna's best friend from boyhood, is Krishna, an avatar, an incarnation of divinity on earth. Arjuna, who doesn't really understand Krishna's divinity, has directed him to drive the chariot into the center of the plain where the great battle is soon to begin. The opposing armies have gathered on each side. It is an epic scene. 2 lone figures park between the legions of good and evil. Masses of soldiers, tents, cook fires, neighing horses, banners snapping in the early afternoon breeze. The bustle, noises, and smells of pre-battle filling the air. Arjuna's eyes scan the opposing forces, pausing on former friends, because this other army sees some of them are his family. They're all the family of his uncle. He sees revered uncles, teachers who taught him his warrior skills. All are bravely making ready for the mutual slaughter. He slumps, breathes heavily, and looks quizzically at Krishna. And so we have here a description of this battle beginning to occur. Now, the way to understand the Bhagavad Gita is that yes, this battle may actually be historical fact. It may have actually occurred, but it's not meant, the literal story is not important. What's in this Bhagavad Gita is always meant to be understood metaphorically. It's a study of the battle that goes on within our consciousness right now between my high side, so to speak, and my low side, the light and the dark, okay, within us. What am I talking about? I'm talking about whenever we get lost in fear, whenever we get lost in anger, whenever we get lost in despair, what's happened? I've gotten lost in the dark side to myself, what Carl Jung called the shadow self. And it's a good way to describe it. We've all got this. That's why we're here, is to overcome that darkness. What is darkness? Darkness is simply the absence of light. It has no substance, in itself. It's simply the absence of light. Light is substance, you see. And so when we lose our connection with the light that's within us, we get lost in darkness. And how does that happen? It happens because we get lost in our minds. You and I consist of three parts: of body, mind, and soul. The big dilemma we have is our mind is so powerful, it has an ability to take over. And we get lost in our thoughts and our feelings, okay, which is what our mind consists of. And we lose our contact with who we really are, you see, with the center of our being, with the essence of who we are. In Christianity, we'd call that the Christ. In Hinduism, in the Bhagavad Gita, they use the word Atma, A-T-M-A, the Atma. When we lose touch with the Atma, you see, that's when we get lost in darkness. And so the Bhagavad Gita says so often when we're having this war going on in our mind, my finances are out of control. My job situation is out of control. The most important relationship in my life is just left me, and I'm falling apart. It's like the dark side is winning the battle. But the Bhagavad Gita says there's a solution to this dilemma. The solution is spiritual. The solution is to find your true self, to break out of your mind, to reconnect with your center. And the Bhagavad Gita answers the most important questions in life that we've all mankind and womankind have asked themselves since the very beginning. Who am I? What's this all about anyway? Why does there have to be so much suffering? Is there a God? What's the nature and character of God? What's my relationship with God? What's my relationship with others? All these are the basic questions, you see, that at some point we all have to ask ourselves. And where do we find answers? We find them in great spiritual teachings, such as the Bhagavad Gita. So that's the dilemma we're in. I'd like to read to you one more quote here from his preface. Jack Harley says, "Imagine a man we can all identify with is in dire straits." Now Arjuna basically is having what today we might call it PTSD. He's killed many people, and today he's saying, I can't do this anymore. And he's like crushed. Yet he's got his whole army is dependent on him. If he doesn't provide leadership, not only will he die, but everybody that's under him will die as well. So he's crushed, but he's telling Krishna, I can't fight this battle. Imagine a man we all identify with is in dire straits at a crossroads, brought to his knees by the great pressures and complexities of life, shakily reaching out, and his best friend, an incarnation of God, takes his hand and walks him through the answer, explaining step by step the most profound secrets of all ages. So Eckhart Tolle says that when you read the Bhagavad Gita, it's 18 chapters long. The first chapter basically kind of sets you up for the story. It's a segue from the much larger epic, the Mahabharata, to this particular event. And the real spiritual literature in the spiritual gold is found in chapters 2 through 18. Eckhart Tolle says if you understand just one chapter, okay, just focus on just one chapter, you can get the whole book. Because every chapter basically is teaching the same spiritual truths, just a little bit different aspect. So what he does is he focuses on his 3-hour interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita on chapter 2. Today we're going to look at chapter 2. We don't have time. I don't have 3 hours here. So, so we're going to just take a look at maybe 3 main lessons that I found in the first 3 that kind of jumped out at me in chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita. The first lesson has to do with surrender. Okay? Surrender to what? Surrender to God. Surrender to the flow of the universe. I'm going to read to you, this comes right out of the Bhagavad Gita chapter 2. Arjuna says, I'm utterly confused. I beg you to tell me what I should do, talking to Krishna. I am your pupil. Be my teacher, my guru. I take refuge in you and surrender to you. Please instruct me, beloved Krishna. Show me the way. And so this is the first great lesson in the Bhagavad Gita. The only way we're going to ever find God is to ask God to come into our lives, to surrender to God. God, we often say, let go and let God. You know, it's the only way we're going to ever find God is if we ask God to come into our lives. God will never, because we have free will and God wants us to learn to use our free will, God wants us to choose Him rather than darkness, you see, rather than fear, you know. And so we have free will. When I was 10 years old, I'll never forget, I was given my first Bible by the Talbot Park Baptist Church Sunday school class that I was in. The Baptists are wonderful at teaching us about the Bible, you know. And so I got my first Bible, 10 years old, 1956. And in that Bible was a picture of a man in a house looking out the door. And outside the door was Jesus coming in. And coming into this man's house. And this door to this house was unusual. It only had a knob on one side of the door. The knob was on the inside. There was no knob on the outside. And the teaching here was, which is such a great teaching, is that Jesus, God through Jesus, through Krishna, whoever our spiritual master might be, only comes into our heart when we open the door ourselves, you see. And ask God to come in. That's very important, because I know so many. I work as a psychotherapist. All week I see these folks with incredible problems. You know, I mean, Cynthia Funk used to say we're in the misery business. She did what I did, and that's kind of like what we do. You know, we help people who are in misery to escape. And it's amazing how 90% of the people that I talk with, well, not 90 when they do Gallup polls. It says that 90% of people in the Gallup poll say they believe in a higher power, which is very amazing to me. You know, 90% of Americans believe in a higher power. So when I'm talking to people, I will often ask people, do you have any spiritual beliefs? Just a very open-ended, and rarely does someone say, well, I don't. No, I don't. You know, I'm an atheist. And I've had a few that would say I'm an atheist. To me, atheism is just another religion. It's just another belief system, you know. But I don't tell them that, right? But but so I can talk to people about spirituality, and some people are very, very much open to it. And I'll say, have you found any spiritual teachers that talk to you? And just generally, I don't preach to them. I ask them questions. And the person will talk, and then some people, this is what they need to hear. But that is the ultimate solution. I work a lot with addiction. That's my specialty. So it's interesting that the 12 steps in Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps, 7 are about God. You see? 7 are spiritual. They talk about a higher power. This 12 step says, now that I've had a spiritual awakening, you see, I will go forth and help other people who are alcoholics to be free. But the 12 steps is a spiritual model for recovery, because the creator of the 12 steps, a man named Bill Wilson, knew that was the only thing that worked for him. You know, it's the only thing it works long term, is really going beyond our head. See, addiction is a disease of the body and the mind. So what I want to do is break free of my body and my mind, and that's finding the spiritual side to myself. That's why it works so well. And if in this area, by the way, it's amazing to me how many 12-step meetings there are. In this area, there must be at least 50 different groups, AA groups and NA groups, Narcotics Anonymous groups, and Gamblers Anonymous groups that meet every week in this city. And some of those meetings you go to, there's 40 to 50 people. So the 12 steps really work, and it's all based on a spiritual model of recovery. And how does it work? It's the suffering caused by addiction causes people to break down to the point that these are people that weren't really spiritual, before, they'll tell me. But it breaks you down, and then you're asking God for help, and doggone it, it starts to work. You start feeling some peace for the first time. So surrender, see, is the first great lesson in the Bhagavad-Gita. The second lesson I like to look at is lesson number 2, has to do with immortality, the teaching on immortality. I'd like to read to you this. Krishna says, "There has never been a time when I or you did not exist. There will never be a time when we cease to exist. Physical bodies appear and disappear, but not the Atma, which is the soul, the life force that lives within them. This life force comes and dwells in a body for a while." We're talking about you. You're the essence of who you are. "While therein, it experiences infancy, childhood, youth, and old age, and then upon death passes eventually to a new body. Changes," we're talking about reincarnation, obviously. "Changes such as death pertain to the body, not the Atma. The wise person does not get caught up in the delusion that he or she is this body, Arjuna. This delusion is the very definition of ego." So basically it's simply saying what we've heard many times, that life is eternal, that you and I really have no beginning, we have no end. It's impossible to die because the essence of who we are is God, you see, is a part of the body of God, you see. So our body dies, yes, but the Atma, the essence of who we are, what the Christians would call that Christ never dies, okay? It's so important that we make peace with death. It's so important because if we don't, the process of death will be it's horrifying. We may not be dying tomorrow, but our best friend may be dying. And it's horrifying if we haven't made peace with death. I like that old country song, "Everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die." Y'all ever heard that one? Yeah. Chris Van Cleve told me about that one. A friend of his actually thought of that, and they became a hit record. So everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. That's so true. I want to go to heaven, but even though I'm at peace with death, if somebody told me I was going to die tomorrow, die soon, I'd be freaking out at first. I can't help it. I like being alive right now. But a good example of a person who really showed the rest of us how to die with grace, who really was at peace with death because he really understood death, was David Solomon. Some of you know David. David was the adopted son of Paul Solomon. He was here back in the 90s, the 80s, did a lot of work, and then he left when Paul passed to find his fortune. He went to the West Coast and became very rich in internet sales. At one point, he was told that he goes to the doc. The doc says, "Mr. Solomon, we hate to tell you this, but you've got brain cancer, and you'll probably be alive about another 6 months." And so, of course, he was shocked by that, and he decided he'd come back here to Virginia Beach to basically spend the last time of his life. It turned out he lived for several more years. And he came back here, and he did so much to help our church. And I am ever grateful to David Solomon for the injection of good energy he gave to our church during the time he was here. We all knew David was going to die. David talked openly about it. He knew it. He had no fear. He even wrote a book about death right before he passed.
On his stomach, flat on the bed.
Yeah, 2 weeks before he passed, this is the kind of guy, and I think, can you imagine yourself doing this? But 2 weeks before he passed, of course, he didn't know it was only 2 weeks away. He's on his bed at his home in Bay Colony. He live streams a sermon, our Sunday sermon, to us on Sunday morning, and gives us a talk to inspire us. You know, it was really too much. You know, I mean, it's over. I can't believe what he did. It was just a wonderful gift to us, and he showed there was how to really face death. Now that's the way to die. He had what Marty, my wife, who worked at the oncology ward and dealt with death every day at the Virginia Beach General Hospital. The nurses called this a gourmet death. You know, he had a death. He showed the rest of us how to do it. In this church, when someone passes, I've done a number of memorial services. I always say it, and every time my standard thing is I'll say we're here today to feel our sadness, because there is sadness. No matter how much you've made peace with death, if you're still here and someone you dearly love has passed, you're going to be grieving the loss of this person. So I say we want to honor the sadness that we're feeling right now. Feel your feelings, you know. But then I'll say we're here also for a second reason, and that is to celebrate the life of this person who just passed. And everybody feels good about that. In this church, we talk about graduation. When someone dies, it's like you're graduating from planet Earth, from University Earth. We've finished our curriculum. Now it's time to move on to the next university on another plane. So we have a very positive attitude, as best we can, of the death process. I think we've all made peace with death. The third lesson, the last lesson I'd like to share with you, is a lesson about non-resistance, okay? In other words, this is all about, instead of fighting with life and saying no to life, I can't stand my life, the idea is you say yes to life. And the Bhagavad-Gita reads like this. This is Krishna talking to Arjuna. Arjuna, the contact of bodily senses with objects and attractions in the world creates feelings like sorrow or happiness and sensations like heat and cold. But these are impermanent, transitory, coming and going like passing clouds. Just endure them patiently and bravely. Learn to be unaffected by them. So he's saying life life is like this. It's like a movie in a way. We're like, what's going to happen to me today? We don't really know. We didn't write the script, but so it's a different thing. Every day is like a new scene in the show called the story of Bruce Shelton or whatever, and this like the screen comes and Krishna is saying, instead of being so reactive, you see, to what's going on, just accept it. He says everything that's happening is impermanent, transitory, coming and going like passing clouds. If you look at your own life and the times in your life when you've had dark times, when you've had lost, and it's like an emotional tornado hit your home, your life. Every storm has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Look at your own life, and you can see the evidence of that. You see, this too will pass. If you just remind yourself of that when you're experiencing a really hard time, that would be it's so helpful. Krishna goes on to say, the serene person, unaffected by these worldly feelings and sensations, is the same in pain and pleasure and does not allow him or herself to get disturbed or sidetracked. This is the person fit for immortality. Realize this and assert your strength, Arjuna. Do not identify your true self merely with your mortal body. So the idea is, in our life, our life is like the weather. We go through a period, the weather's great, then we might go through a period in which everything's terrible. The weather's terrible, right? Our lives are like that. And he's saying here, learn to be non-reactive. Learn to be to say yes to life, to go with the flow of life, rather than in our own mind saying, I can't stand this. This is horrible. This is terrible. I waited all week to have this picnic, to go out in the state park. It's raining. I can't stand it. My whole day is ruined. Instead of that, he's saying, oh, I wake up on Saturday, it's raining. Gosh, it's too bad. We'll have to do something else today, That's the way to go with life. You see, when we're getting hit with these curveballs, which life is good at throwing at us. So I'd like to end with just one little story that kind of tells what I'm trying to say better than any story I've ever heard. This is a story of a monk who lived in ancient Japan, and he lived on a hill in a village, and he was esteemed by all the villagers. Everybody looked up to him. This man, they knew this man was truly a wise man. He was a Zen monk, and he really was an enlightened master. And everybody looked up to him. When there were problems in the family, they'd go up to him and say, "We need help with this. There's a dispute with my neighbor. Please help us." And one day, this 16-year-old girl got pregnant, and parents were alarmed. They said, "What? Who did this to you?" The dad, first they were shocked, and then they got mad. They said, angry. The dad said, "Who did this to you?" She's only 16 years old. She says, "The monk on the hill." So the dad and the parents are now inflamed, and the word spreads throughout the village. And the monk, all of a sudden, he's looked down upon by everybody. When the child is born some months later, the parents take the child, the baby, up to his house, beat on his door. "You're the dad. You take care of this child, this baby. He is your responsibility." And all the villagers then left with their torches and went back to the village. And all the monk said to them was, "Aso, aso." He didn't say, "It's not my child. It's not fair." He'd never raised a child. He says, "Aso." All of a sudden, the scene in his life changed dramatically, but instead of fighting with it, he went with it. He took the child, he raised the child. Well, about a year later, this young girl contacted this terrible illness and was dying from this illness. She's on her deathbed. And she says, "Dad, Mom, I have to tell you something. The monk on the hill is not the father. It's actually the butcher's son." And he's about her age. And the parents, of course, their jaws drop. They can't believe what they're hearing. That all this time, the entire village has been just blackballing this monk, right? And he hadn't done anything. So everybody's told in the village, they all go up, and this time they're real humble, and they knock gently on the door and say, "We're terribly sorry. We realize we made a terrible mistake here. We'll take the child. We will raise the child from this point." The monk gives him the child and says, "Aso." No reaction. Now this monk probably has gotten bonded with this child. The scene changes. He knows the child can better be raised by the family. So he gives the child back to the family. And he goes on with his life. Now, how many of us would react like that? You see? I don't think I would. How many times, have you ever been, somebody humiliated you or something in front of others or made you really put you down? What do we do? It's happened to me. I go home and I just can't let go of it. I'm so upset. How could that person have done this to me? Said those words to me. How could this have happened? Now, I have a choice, okay, and so do you. I can continue with those thoughts, nourishing those angry, resentful thoughts, okay? What does that do? It robs me of the only thing that counts, which is my own peace of mind. It doesn't hurt anybody else. What if I can instead, through my daily prayer and meditation, when I feel this anger, say, "God, I feel all this anger. Please help me. My ego will not let go of it. But I'm asking you to take it. I'm letting it go." Now, every time I do that, that anger and resentment becomes less and less. You see, that thought pattern in my mind is not being reinforced now, so it becomes less and less. So that's the solution. As the Bhagavad-Gita says, there's a spiritual solution to the problems in our life. And my time has come to an end. Thank you so much. It's been a joy talking to you today.